welcome back to the Command Your Brand Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Ryan Slate, the CEO and co-founder of Command Your Brand. We help our clients to combat cancel culture by placing them on the right podcasts and new media. You can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com. Guys, I'm very excited for the conversation we're going to have today. And a reminder before we do that to like this video, leave us a comment and smash that subscribe button if you want to command your brand. So before we get to today's guest, I'm going to introduce you guys to in just a second. We have some changes going on over here at the Command Your Brand Show. I'm going to be jumping in here every once in a while to do episodes like this one we're going to have with today's guest. But we're going to be having a new host on the show as Josh Silvestro, who is the public face of our company, Command Your Brand, is going to be having a lot of the conversations on this show with people that may be coming on board and clients or other people in the podcast world. So I think you guys are going to enjoy the next episode we have coming out with Josh. But today, I'm very excited for our guest. Somebody that has been around in podcasting like pretty close to when it was invented. He's been around in this space that long. So Harry Duran, welcome, man.
Jeremy, thank you so much. Always fun to have a round two. Thank you for gracing me with your presence on my show. The episode just happened to go live this morning. So great timing, and glad to be back with you.
So just so I'm not fake newsing it here, man. How long have you been in the podcast world? Like, is it 2010, 12,
no, 14,
14. Okay.
Yeah,
so we're about the same time. For some reason, I thought like podcasting started in like 2005 and you've been like around ever since then. I had this idea like that.
Yeah, I think it's 2005, 2006. You know, the podcast nerds will tell you like when the actual like first RSS feed was created, and it was like synced up with a iPod, and obviously hence the name. Adam Curry's generally credited, called the Podfather, with like publishing the first podcast.
Yeah, and Adam's actually been on the show a couple times to kind of talk about being in an elevator with Steve Jobs and all that fun stuff. But Harry, so for people that don't know who you are, man, other than apparently being a Yankees fan, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, man.
Yeah, so I guess I mean I'm wearing the podcasting hat a lot now, but I was in corporate for like 20 plus years. I was in corporate marketing, and then in around 2012-ish, I was just trying to figure out what was going to be my next move. My first passion is actually like electronic music, house music. So I grew up DJing, still got my vinyl set up here in the office. And I wanted to start a podcast, interview other DJs. And I thought that was going to be fun. But then I figured out that was going to be pretty hard to track all these globetrotting DJs down. So I was like, let me talk to podcasters. I went over to New Media Expo in Las Vegas in January 2014. Pat Flynn was there, Amy Porterfield, some of the OGs. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Let me create a show in the style of like Inside the Actor Studio, except podcasting, and get a peek behind the mic. Because normally you just see the polished version of the podcaster on the mic and on the show. And I was like, well, let's tell the real stories of what's happening, when the mic is off, and how they've got a blanket over their head while they're recording and just making things work. But it's been going gangbusters since then. 10 years of the show. This year celebrated 10 years of the show. And then since then, I've launched a podcast agency in 2015 where we launched over 120 clients for 20 shows for our clients, and then started a second show in of all things vertical farming in 2020. And it's now the #1 show in vertical farming, which has been a pretty wild ride.
So let me ask you this for people that, may not have been in the podcast world as long as, you or I have. Tell us about those kind of early days of getting started. Like, how hard was it? How did you actually, because dude, like for people that don't understand, it's so easy now.
Yeah.
and when we started, man, so tell us about like kind of your early setup and like that was even getting online, man.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, shout out to the early school, the places where we can get some training. And, Podcasters Paradise, John Lee Dumas and Kate were really instrumental in pulling like a group of folks together that like were helping them get started. Obviously, John had a lot of success with Entrepreneur on Fire, but we just had to figure out the basics. And thankfully, early on, people were guiding us on at least something like the ATR 2100. Make sure you get that mic. And so people were using that in the beginning. But it was really like Skype. I had to do Skype with call recorder plugged in at the beginning. But I wanted video. So Jeremy, from day one.
How many times did that thing fail to record, by the way? Like I had the problem where you think it was recording. It would tell you it's recording. It was crashed. And you just be like, I know the last 20 minutes we talked about some great stuff. It's all gone.
Yeah. But what I realized is, hey, I'm going to get an hour with this person, and I really thought about the importance of building those relationships. And I said, if I'm just on the phone with them, or they just hear my voice, because that's what we were doing back in 2014, just audio podcasts. It's not going to be the same as if I can at least see their face. And we weren't recording video at the time, but that sort of MacGyver thing that we were able to piece together let me see the person, and then it would record the audio. And that was instrumental, because then, I'd end up going to podcast conferences, and they'd see my face and I'd see them, and I'll be like, oh, because you had an hour conversation with them. And just slowly over time, I started reaching out to some of like the OGs in podcasting, the Dave Jacksons of the world and Elsie Escobar. And just like, I wanted to get them to hear their stories, but it was just realizing early on that I wanted to build that relationship. And it's really what I realize now. Podcasting is you creating your own stage, rather than waiting to be invited in other people's stages. And it was just, I was realizing the more and more I was having these conversations, that's exactly what was happening.
And I guess for you, like, when did you know that this was going to be something for you? Like, when did you realize that this was more than just something you were kind of toying with?
I think for something, it was always this idea of, just showing up every day, because, early on, like, those numbers are not really that significant. And even now, for this specific show, this show, Matt, really is just a platform. My show, Podcast Junkies, actually, is just a opportunity for me to connect with other people I want to have relationships with, or connect with. And as long as the only commonality is that they have a podcast, I can now invite them on the show. And I just realized how important it was to have a brand around a podcast. If you Google Podcast Junkies now, like the first 6 or 7 entries on the first page of Google are my show. It's either the website or Apple or Spotify. And it's just really reinforced the importance of having a place that you can build up a brand over time. It's not going to happen overnight. And I know a lot of podcasters get started and they want that instant like celebrity effect, but I think I'm reading Tom Webster's new book. I don't know if you caught that, but it's really fascinating. Podcasters build the show like, they want to create, without thinking about the show your audience wants to hear. And those are two different things. And I think in the beginning, we create this show that we're like, oh, we love doing this and it's fun. But you have to really think about if you're in it for the long haul. And I'm thinking about some things after reading that book about revamping my show, but just create something that people actually want to hear and that your audience is actually like, clamoring for.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's interesting is I feel like we can get like a band's third album where we get like really experimental at times, you know what I mean? And like, I think of all the bands like I loved and they did that like second or third album. I'm like, what are you guys doing? I'm not going to buy this thing again. Although there's some that I was like, maybe like them more. I'm curious for you, what has experimentation in your show been like? How have changes been received, not been received? And how have you tried to bring what the audience wants into it? Because I think in the beginning, the hard part is we really don't know what they want, right? And so I guess how have you handled a lot of that?
I mean, it's early on, it's for new podcasters, it's the 101 stuff, because you come up with your questions and you got your questions in hand. And you're like, okay, I'm going to get through these questions with this person. And you've got like maybe your 10. And then you quit. And I'm sure you've realized this as well. After the first couple, you realize this is not going to work, because it either goes so quick that you answer your 10 questions and you still got half an hour to fill up. And you're like, oh, shit, I got to figure this out. But it was actually John Lee Dumas's show, because he gives, notoriously, he only gives you 30 minutes for his show, and you better get a slot. You can get a slot whenever you can manage it. And he's got this crazy intense, like, workflow where he does, last time I talked to him a couple of years ago, he does like 14 episodes in one day and then another 14 in another day. And
I've heard him talk about that. Like I remember like back in the days when I was really cranking out episodes and I was doing like 5 a week or 3 a week, like I would sit down and I had Fridays were my interview days.
Yeah.
And like I'd crank out like 7 interviews. And like I really didn't like people by the time I got through 7. So like I have no idea how he does that, man.
Like that's that military background. He was in the Army. So he just kind of like hammered them out. And he's like, oh, in 2 days, I take care of my entire month's, progress or like output. But what was interesting is like, I don't have that much time. And I think it was in the middle of the day and I just showed up and I was just like a little bit nervous because it was like my 6th interview. And I looked at my questions. I was like, I'm not going to be able to get through these. So I just like put them down. I was just like, let's just talk, what's going on in your life and how's it going? And I really felt like that was a turning point for me to start realizing that they're not interviews, they're conversations. And it helped me build up and hone that muscle of just being naturally curious, asking open-ended questions, being comfortable with silence, and just being able to connect with that person on the other end of the camera. And then realizing over time that there's three people in a podcast conversation, the host, the guest, and the listener. And it's always listener singular. Like there's one person listening to us at this time. They've got their earbuds on, going for a run, going for a walk. And so I'm always conscious of that relationship. And I always want it to feel like, you and I are having a chat in a bar, and someone just pulls up a stool and just kind of listening into us. And it's always, for me, once I had that realization, then it just became a matter of like, who's doing this really well? Like the Jordan Harbingers of the world, the Tim Ferrisses of the world. Like, what are they doing? What types of questions are they asking? And I'm like, oh, that was a great question. Like I would start to incorporate things. So just iterating over time. And I think that's why I keep my show going. It's not like crazy downloads, but it's me putting in the reps in. Like I have to keep coming in and I have to keep showing up. And every time a new person comes in, they come in with some fresh ideas and something that keeps me like on my game to make sure that I'm still being an engaging interviewer.
You know what I think is interesting, and I don't think he gets enough credit for it. I think Aaron Mahnke's always done a great job in making the listener feel like they're the only person listening.
Yeah.
Because it is. I think people don't put enough importance on it, but it's really important, right?
Yeah.
Because you feel like somebody's having a conversation with you, whereas like when you're directing it to a group of people, you're likely directing it to no one.
Yeah. I think what I've noticed early on is people would come in from radio or people who do like public speaking, and they'd be like, "Hey everyone, it's my podcast." Like they're on stage, and also like we both have got the same mics here. And like if I move the mic away, like you lose that intimacy right away, right? But and just these little things that you learn over time, and that you're building an intimate relationship. I remember one time I went to a podcast movement, and it's a woman there who had been listening to my show, and she's like, "Oh my God, Harry, like I listen to you every time I before I go to sleep." Like she's like, my voice was so soothing that she would have it playing for me. And like her husband was there, and I was like, it's a little awkward, but that's cool.
I will tell you that's been the biggest challenge for me because I listen to a lot of like sports shows, political, cultural shows, and stuff like that. So like since this Roman Empire thing has kind of hit for me, is I'm actually like going on a lot of the shows I listen to. So like I know way more about these shows than any guest typically would know.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to balance out like not being a homer when you show up on the show. You know what I mean? Like I know way too much about these people. So
Total
this could be a little,
you
got to try not to fanboy. So I think that's an interesting point. For you, what have been like the biggest changes you've seen in podcasting over the years? Like I know like the technology has changed dramatically, but I guess what have for you, if you looked at and you're like, there's been this change, that change, maybe some good ones, maybe some bad ones. Like what have you kind of seen in the podcast world?
I think in the beginning, there's the term pod fading for a reason. And I think the number is 7. Like if you get to 7, then you realize, whoa, this is way harder than I thought. And people, I think in the beginning, obviously we're riding the serial wave. And so there was a wave of people trying to make like NPR style quality podcasts, and they all sounded like serial knockoffs. So you can tell that they were just trying to mimicking that style. And so I think people just got in and got out, and it was probably good for podcasting to just shake those folks out. And because you can see, friends that we know that have been doing this for a while, and they've just been consistent. And so I think over time, I think it's people thinking like trying to build up a celebrity profile from a podcast. And we hear like these multi-million-dollar podcasts that are being created by these huge production studios. And like after one season, they're done because it's like nobody's listening to them.
Well, I know even NPR, and this was like last year, Adam Curry actually did a whole thing on this on No Agenda about it. Like NPR laid off, it was like half or a third of like their entire staff because they were trying to take everything they did with radio and bring it to podcasting. And it's just not the same at all.
No. And then I think obviously what's happening recently now is with YouTube, the growth of YouTube. YouTube is the number 2 search engine. Spotify has now allowed you to upload your video. So they're now competing with YouTube as a video platform. So it's interesting to see. And it's changing the dynamic because most podcasters, what they loved about podcasting was that they could just be sort of like anonymous and you could just hear their voice and you don't have to do video. So it's really changing how people are thinking about it. And even what the term means. And I know Adam has his own thoughts about what exactly is a podcast, but I think it was an eye opener for me a couple of years ago when I was taking a lift to the airport and I told the driver I had a podcast, and he's like, we got to the airport and he pulls out his phone and he opens up YouTube. It's the first app he went to right away.
That's a very, very good point. I know Adam's still been like, no, it's not. I don't get on video for anyone. Hey, I've got him on video twice, but like, he's like, I don't get on video for anyone. We do audio only. But I do think we have to look at how we're going to reach people
Yeah.
And like, I know I'm very much the purist as a lot of people are out there, but at the same time, that can cut off our ability to reach new people, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a platform that has that much reach, it's really, you can fight it. You can just go in kicking and screaming and be like, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to post my content on there. But these platforms like Riverside, like Squadcast, like Zencaster, they're making it easier to, to have no excuses to have high quality audio and video now. And obviously, if you're serious about building a brand or building your own visibility, there's so many different ways to do it. And even now, like I've taken a newsletter I've been doing for 3 years that I've just been publishing. And now I'm inspired by this guy, Dan Coe, who's blown up and become really popular. But I'm reading out the newsletters on camera now to kind of do a solo episode because I'm like, I want to get more visibility and I want to get this content found. If you're really passionate about what you're doing and you really feel that your message is like important and could be life-changing, you sort of owe it to your audience to get it out there on all the platforms as much as possible. Because if you're just doing it as a hobby and it's just like something that's just a pastime for you and you're not really serious about the content, I get it. But, and I know this is, something that's near and dear to your heart. If you're delivering a message that you feel is important and more people need to hear it, then you got to be on the platforms that have the widest distribution. It just makes the most sense.
Well, what's funny, and I don't know if this shows kind of the direction we're going. I started another YouTube channel purely on Roman Empire stuff. And I actually haven't released it as a podcast anywhere at this point in time. And this new Roman Empire channel is now doing somehow bigger numbers than my regular podcast. It's growing at this like gargantuan rate. Yeah. But I've kind of reimagined the whole thing. I don't even have an audio feed out there. So I think it is definitely interesting the direction things are going related to video.
Yeah. And it might, again, it could just be another opportunity to find an audience because a lot of people are going into Spotify, are going into Apple, and they're searching for topics that are pain points for them. And that's why, when we think about like producing shows, we tell clients like title your episode. Like it's one of the first exercises we do with them, title your first 12 episodes, because think about your episodes as being prescriptive. Like what are people, what's a pain point? What's something they're struggling with? Because they're going to see that and they're like, oh, okay, is this specific episode going to solve the problem that I have right now?
Well, and I think the thing that's interesting about, kind of the direction that we're going with YouTube, at least the thing it's solved for me, and I don't know how it's been for other people, is, this is a number of years ago. This is probably like 2013, 14, like Ryan Moran had done an episode about the weird thing about podcasting is you put out a bunch of content. You don't know if anyone's listening to it. You kind of have these like download numbers. You don't really get a ton of feedback. Once in a while, you get an email or something like that. The thing that's been different about, being on YouTube and Rumble and some of these other places, and I don't know, maybe this is something that changes in the future, or maybe somebody's already solved this. I don't know. Like to me, podcasting has been a very closed off feedback loop. And the thing I want the most is to actually communicate with the people consuming my content. So, other than some people telling me I should quit my job and I'm terrible at it. The actual ability to have conversations with people listening to content has been incredible.
And then do you see that there's more like the nature of the engagement that you're seeing on YouTube? Is that something that's worthwhile in terms of comments, or is it just, a mix of trolls?
So here's what I'll say. Like 1 out of every 10 is going to be something absolutely terrible, where they're going to tell me like to shave my dumb looking mustache or, like, how am I going to prison or something like that, where the other 9 are like really useful things where I'm actually talking to people about the topic, right? Like, hey, I noticed you said this about Caesar in 49 BC, but what about this in 55 as we're kind of on our way there? So like, I'm actually like talking to people about what I'm creating. And like, that's been a closed loop for me for years. I don't know if that's something you've experienced maybe with your vertical farming stuff or what.
No, I mean, totally. That's the thing. Like as a podcaster, when you're first getting started, you're starving for any sort of engagement. And that's why in the beginning, I was trying everything, like everything from like the guerrilla marketing of like making shirts for my podcast and going to Podcast Movement and handing them out to people and saying like, being a walking billboard for the show. But then I started everything from like Facebook groups and just tried all these different community channels and just really looking for ways. A newsletter, obviously you have to have something to communicate to your folks. You're trying to find all these places that's not on like all the rented land, like all the socials. And, obviously having that direct communication with your listeners is great, but you have to actively like nurture that. And you have to say, hey, one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is polling my audience, because I've been reading Tom's book and I'm just like, this is really inspiring. Like, why do you listen? How long you've been listening? Does the episode need to be longer or shorter? What makes you stop listening? And some of these answers to these questions you may not want to hear.
Yeah.
But if you're serious about growing your show and even maybe possibly reformatting it, you have to listen, and you have to find those super fans that have stuck around with you and ask them those tough questions, because you're not going to have one kind of podcast listener. You could have a couple of different varieties, but you should really, really know what those are. And I think most podcasters, probably 99% of them, like, are not going to do that work because they don't want to do the work of surveying the audience and figuring out what's working, what's not.
Right. So we are wearing a different wardrobe than just a few minutes ago, if you noticed that. I think Harry had a Yankees hat on last time.
Yes.
I had a hat on. I didn't have my hair done, and I have a button up on today. So we're in very different swag. So
we jump timelines.
We jump timelines, man. This is like what is that movie? Where Leo DiCaprio's kind of jumping all over the place. Inception. So it's kind of like that. So my power went out, and we have a generator in the garage. We have the whole house hook up, and I didn't want to like go drag the generator and like hook it up to the house if it was only going to be out a few hours, and ended up being out 8. Where I live, guys, you may not know this, and it's the middle of nowhere in the woods, so we don't even have cell service. So when the internet goes out, everything goes out. So poor Harry was probably on the other side, like, the hell just happened? Like, what did I say? Where did he go? So he was nice enough to be willing to jump on with here for a few minutes with us and just kind of wrap up our conversation today about podcasting. And it's been a really great conversation up to this point. So Harry, the thing I wanted to talk about next is kind of just the future of podcasting and where you see it going. So in your viewpoint, what does podcasting's future look like, man?
I think what's important for people to understand, and probably what happened here, is a reflection of the mindset that podcasters need to have, like tenacity, this ability to move forward and to realize, like, there's going to be stuff like this that happens. And for most people, that's going to be discouraging enough to be like, well, podcasting is too much. I'm too overwhelmed. I can't really handle these ups and downs. And, I've been podcasting for 10 years, and you have as well, Jeremy, and you know that you have to be resilient with podcasting, and you have to be willing to also change your show. And it's something that I'm doing recently. I mentioned a book I was reading, The Audience is Listening by Tom Webster. And it's really having me think about stripping my show down to the foundation, and just saying, maybe I need to just kind of rethink what I intended to do with the show when I started may not be what the show needs now to move forward. And it may even mean that I'm just like, I'll stop the show and just do something else. And I know you can relate to this because you've done something similar. And
an enormous change on this side, but I'm having more fun, I'll say.
Yes. And that's the thing. We all are when we start, we're putting on this presentation of who we want to be on air. And we do this like on our Instagram posts and Facebook posts. And as we mature and, we have a lot of ups and downs and stuff happen to us, we realize maybe it's just better that we be honest. And it's so much easier to be honest and true about what's happening in this world and to speak truth to power, like you're doing a lot now. And I think as podcasters, this is our responsibility. So I think the future of podcasting is really honest conversations. Like there's room probably for the fluff and the boring housewives of whatever city is popular next, but and people can watch that. But I think the people are waking up. Everybody's waking up and they're realizing the power of podcasting to have these conversations that are not being had anywhere else, that you're privy to and that your agency is helping people connect with. So I think really authenticity, that's the kind of the word that comes up, authenticity, and being able to find the people that are talking about the things that you want to talk about and just talk about them on your show and just really realizing, people think about podcasts and they think about they geek out on like RSS feed equals podcast, etc. Fine, it's a podcast, and you guys can argue about that in the Reddit forums all you want. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're creating shows. You have a show, and the show resides on YouTube. The show resides on these podcast players, Spotify, Apple. Those are just platforms, and they may come and go. But if you keep in mind that you have a show, and the purpose of your show is to educate and entertain your audience, and if everything you do around the podcast is for the benefit of your audience, not for you, because in the beginning you're like, I'm going to do a show because I like talking to people. Yeah. I think that mind shift of like having real conversations and realizing at the end of the day, like we're nothing without our, our audience. So speak to the things that are passionate for you, that light you up, and then build your audience, and they'll come. They may not be there in the beginning, and you'll be like, oh, I'm like, there's not a lot of people who seem to be interested in this topic, but then all of a sudden the floodgates open and they find your show and they're like, oh, that's a beacon of light that I was looking for.
I'll tell you what, man, I cannot wait for the Real Housewives of Wichita. I think it's going to be killer, man. But I think the one thing that I think is important to take from what you just said as well, like the thing that came to me is when I did my first reach out back in 2014, I reached out to people I most admired, right? And I got a few yeses, but a lot of no's. And one of the first people that reached back was Seth Godin. He was super nice about it too. And he's like, like, congratulations, good luck with your new podcast. But like, reach back out to me when you get to 300. And I think he said that thinking I'd never get there. So I got to the 290s and I reached back out and I'm like, Seth, we're almost at 300, man. When are we going to record that episode? And he ended up doing it. And he was our episode, I'm sorry, 400th episode. So for a lot of people, I don't know if they're willing to put in the time and effort in the follow-up, because I found even with getting good guests, like Dave Asprey took me 5 years to get. And I think a lot of times people aren't willing to put that staying power in. Yeah. And when you're trying to build a great show, man, that is vital.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important. And it, you learn this as a business owner too, like when you start doing sales and lead generation, and people are like, oh, get back to me in 6 months. And most people, if they don't have a system in place, they'll just be like, okay, and they forget about it. But I'm just like setting these 6-month reminders, these 1-year reminders. I go back to people sometimes, and I had a client that it took me 2.5 years of conversations with emails back and forth, and he'd had some life stuff going on, but eventually like he ended up signing up as a client. And if I hadn't been persistent or consistent with my engagement and respectful of his time and what he was asking for, a lot of times people were all busy, and so they're not trying to push you off. They're just like, I need some time. And I think it's being this idea of being consistent and reaching out to the people that you want to connect with that inspire you, because they'll be impressed and say, oh wow, Jeremy actually came back 5 years later. Like, he's still got a show. My
best clients that way. Like, I don't know about you, but my best clients have been the people that said 6 months from now, a year from now. Like, I have a client now. He's on his 4th year, and he pays us once a year every year. Yeah. And it was hey, wait 6 months. It's the best clients. Sometimes take some forethought.
Yeah. So I really think it's important to really decide how serious you want to be about your show. If you want to have a podcast, and if you really think you or have a message that needs to be heard and that you have a unique viewpoint. And even if you, in the beginning, like when I started my show, there was a ton of podcasts about podcasting. I could have easily been discouraged, and I'm like, oh, everyone's doing this, but I'm just like, I'm going to add my own flavor. And I always tell people there could be 10 shows. Not
many anymore, by the way.
No, not many.
So you got some staying power, man.
So it's been interesting to see, because, and I tell people all the time, you could have 10 shows with the same exact topic, but you've got 10 different hosts who've had 10 different lives and 10 different, just journeys. And they're going to bring that, if they're being sincere, they're going to bring that eventually onto their show. And eventually, over time, you'll have 10 completely different shows if people are being authentic.
I think the only one I can think of, Adam Schäuble had a show called Casting the Pod. And I think he's even changed the name now. Yeah. So it's like that's true to even just have some staying power. Yeah. You'd be surprised what even that'll do for you, just to be around longer than others.
I'm actually going to Podcast Movement at the end of this month, and they've given me a slot to have my 10 lessons from 10 years of podcasting. So they gave me a little session. So it was just a nice full circle coming back to the place. 10 years ago is when Podcast Movement launched itself. So I was there when it was just a Kickstarter. They were trying to get a couple people into a hotel in Dallas. They were trying to raise $10,000. And then all these podcasters were like, wait, there's a conference just for podcasters. They quickly got that money, and they was like, we're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah. Well, Harry, I've really enjoyed this conversation. And once again, I'm super grateful to you, man, that you were willing to put in even an additional time to kind of get this thing wrapped up, because due to a power outage. Yeah. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you and check out your show, man?
I think what's coming most alive for me is this ability to start writing about my life journey. I believe everyone has a journey to share, and it's our responsibility to do that, the highs and the lows. And so I've been doing that on my newsletter. So if they just go to harryduran.com, I recently moved everything back over to Substack. I try to be consistent with at least a weekly post. And then links to any of the episodes I do in my shows are always at the bottom. It says what I created this week. And so there'll be lists so you can track what I'm doing. But more importantly for me, I get to share what's happening in my life. And it's not a marketing email. It's just here's what's happening in my life. So for whoever that resonates, I've been getting some good feedback from people on that.
Absolutely. Well, Harry, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, man. And for those of you out there listening, reminder to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash that subscribe button if you want to command your brand through the power of podcasting. Have a good one, everybody.